No one satisfies me. The shout didn't just echo. It cracked through the penthouse like something had split. Not just sound, but the air itself, the temperature, the particular tension that had been building in that room for the last 2 hours. A crystal glass flew from his hand, shattered. Fragments scattered across black marble, skidding into the silence that followed, catching the cold light of neo-soul through the windows before going still. One piece slid almost to the far wall. Nobody watched it go. Nobody moved. The two women by the bed had gone rigid. One frozen mid-step with her heel in her hand, the other pressed back against the headboard with her fingers curled into the silk sheet like it might protect her. Their faces wore the same expression. Not quite fear, something adjacent to it. The particular look of people who understood, without being told, that they were in a room with something that wasn't quite working right. Not dangerous, not violent. Wrong, like a machine running a program it wasn't built for. The guards outside the door didn't enter. The city didn't pause. Rain slammed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Relentless, indifferent, blurring the skyline of neo-soul into long, cold streaks of light. 40 floors below, the world moved like nothing was happening, like there was no man standing barefoot on black marble, surrounded by broken glass, breathing like something inside his chest was trying to claw its way out. And at the center of it all, Jae-hyun Rook, shirtless, still. The kind of still that wasn't calm, it was contained, with the specific stillness of something that had been moving very fast and stopped too suddenly. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate pulls. His jaw was set. His hands, open at his sides, weren't shaking, which was almost stranger than if they had been. He was 34 years old. He was, by most measures of the world, extraordinary. He was also, in this moment, completely hollow. This wasn't anger. Not really. Anger implied there was something to be angry at, someone or something that had failed him. This was something older and more fundamental. This was the thing that had been living inside him since before he understood what living meant. Emptiness, the particular kind that comes not from having nothing, but from having everything and still feeling like something essential is missing. He let out a breath, long and slow, through his nose. Then he laughed. Low, broken at the edges, the kind of laugh that belongs to a man alone on a beach watching a wave take something he'd been holding. Is this it? Neither woman spoke. His eyes moved across the room, slowly like inventory, past silk sheets twisted into shapes that suggested everything and meant nothing, past the two half-empty glasses on the side table, past two faces that were, by any objective measure, stunning, and registered to him right now as less than furniture. At least furniture had function. Is this what men ruin themselves for? Silence, then quieter, almost to himself, the way someone admits something in an empty room that they can't quite say out loud in a full one. Why does it never stay? The women didn't wait to be dismissed. They left fast, efficiently, shoes in hand, Anna moving for the door with the rehearsed speed of people who'd calibrated this exit the moment the glass broke. The taller one paused for a half second at the door, not looking back, just stopping, like she wanted to say something and decided against it. Then she left too. The door clicked shut behind them, that small final sound. And just like that, the most desired man in Neo Soul was alone. Again, always eventually, again. He walked to the window, pressed his palm flat against the glass. Cold. Real. The only thing in the room that felt like either. Below him, the city moved without him. Traffic shifted. Lights changed colors. A delivery bike cut between cars with the confidence of something that had somewhere to be. Someone's window, 40 floors across, still had a light on. Yellow, warm, domestic. Someone's ordinary Tuesday. And he stood there and thought about nothing in particular, because this was the part no one knew about. The part after the glass breaks and the people leave and the door clicks shut. This was the part he never talked about, never performed, never let anyone close enough to witness. The part where he just stood here for years, no matter who he called, no matter what he arranged, no matter how far he pushed into whatever might finally be enough, It always ended here, at the window, alone. No one satisfies me. This time he didn't shout it. He admitted it, quietly. The way a man admits something to himself that he's been running from long enough that his legs finally gave out. Not dramatic, not even particularly sad. Just true. What no one knew, what even he didn't understand yet, was that this wasn't desire, it wasn't hunger. It was something far more dangerous than either. And in less than 3 weeks, a woman would walk through a door he controlled, sit across from him in a room he owned, and do the one thing no one had ever done before. She wouldn't try to satisfy him. She would see him. And that would ruin him in ways the glass and the marble and the rain couldn't touch. He had a name for it, eventually. Not a clinical name. Those came later, delivered in careful, measured language by a doctor in Geneva who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month, and had the particular bedside manner of someone who'd learned to stay very far from his patients emotionally. Before the diagnoses, before the terminology, before anyone else had words for it, Jae-hyun just called it the system. As in, the system is running again. As in, the system won't shut off. It had been there since he was young. He understood that now, in retrospect, the way you understand things about childhood, only after you've lived far enough away from it to see the shape. As a boy, he'd been the kind of child who couldn't stay still. Needed noise, needed motion, or needed something happening at all times, or the world pressed in too close and too heavy and wrong. Not in ways anyone could point to. Just wrong. His parents called it energy. His teachers called it disruptive. His grandfather, the man who'd laid the first brick of what would eventually become the Rook organization, had looked at him across a dinner table when Jae-hyun was 12 years old and said, with the confidence of a man who'd built things, "Hungry men move the world." Said it like it was a gift. Maybe it was. Maybe that hunger, redirected, weaponized, given structure, was responsible for everything he'd built. The legitimate holdings across tech, real estate, private logistics. The shadow network underneath that moved things that needed moving and kept the kind of people who couldn't afford to be seen very, very well hidden. The penthouse, the flat in London, the house in Jeju he'd bought for the view and hadn't visited in 14 months. He had everything. The system still ran. The Geneva doctor, Dr. Weiss, wire-rimmed glasses, the practiced calm of a man who'd made peace with containing other people's storms, had explained it after their 4th session. "This isn't a sex drive issue," he'd said carefully, hands folded on the desk like he was presenting a diagnosis he'd rehearsed. "What you're describing is a pattern with roots much earlier than that. Your nervous system learned, somewhere at some point, that stimulation was safety, that stillness was threat. So it keeps searching, keeps demanding more input. Not because you want it, because your brain has convinced itself that the moment you stop, something terrible happens." Jae-hyun had stared at him. "What does that actually mean?" he said. "It means no amount of more will solve it, because the thing driving it isn't desire." A pause. "It's fear." He hadn't returned after that. Not because the doctor was wrong, because the doctor was exactly right, and Jae-hyun didn't know yet what to do with that. And sitting in that office feeling correctly diagnosed was somehow worse than not knowing. So he managed. He ran his empire with the surgical precision of a man who'd learned that external control was the only control that held. His chief of staff, Min-jun, sharp-faced, meticulous, the only person in 4 years who'd understood that his job was to manage consequences rather than prevent behavior, had learned the language of the signs. The insomnia getting bad. 2 hours, sometimes 3, on a good night. The walking out of meetings mid-sentence. Not storming out, not dramatically, just standing up and leaving because the walls had started closing and the system needed movement, and he was out of the room before the social calculation finished running. The edge under the skin. Always there. Some days louder than others. The days when his gaze in the boardroom was flat in a way that made experienced people avoid direct eye contact. Min-jun managed what Min-jun managed. Rescheduled. Smoothed. Never asked questions that hadn't been invited. Until a Tuesday morning, gray sky, cold coffee, Jae-hyun standing at his office window, watching the city with the expression of a man looking at something he couldn't solve. When Min-jun set a folder on the desk and said, "Hurry with the specific care of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. We found someone different this time." Jae-hyun didn't turn around. "I don't want another referral." "This isn't a referral." Min-jun's voice stayed even, practiced. "She's a psychiatric nurse specialist. High-functioning compulsive dysregulation." 3 separate sources said the same thing. "She doesn't treat symptoms. She treats Min-jun, the system underneath them, and she has a specific approach to Min-jun." Silence. "Not interested," Jae-hyun said. He expected the conversation to end there. That was the usual architecture. Push once, receive resistance, wait for a better moment. Instead, she charges for consultations only. 1 meeting. If you don't want to continue, I never bring it up again. Jae-hyun stared at the city. Something in him, small, worn down, tired in a specific way that had nothing to do with sleep, didn't say no. Min-jun understood the difference, picked up the folder, made the call. She was 7 minutes early. What Min-jun reported wasn't the punctuality, it was the way she arrived. No assistant, no entrance. She came up alone, gave her name at the front desk in 1 sentence, and sat in the waiting area with a slim notebook in her lap and her phone face down on the chair beside her. She didn't look around the office, didn't check her reflection in the floor-length window, didn't perform any of the low-grade, visible anxiety that people usually performed in the 30 seconds before meeting Jae-hyun Rook. She just sat, still, like a woman who was exactly where she decided to be. Jae-hyun watched her on the security feed for 4 minutes before he told Min-jun to send her in. He'd already decided he wasn't going to like her. She walked through the door and the first thing she did was pause. Not nervously, not performing caution, just reading the room the way someone reads something they'll need to remember. Her eyes moved across the space quickly, practically, then they moved to him, landed, stayed. Amara Vance. Her voice was level. Not warm, not cold, just even, well-built. "Before we begin, I need to set some boundaries around how I work." He was behind his desk, didn't stand, looked at her the way he looked at everything new, with the flat, assessing attention of a man taking inventory and deciding value. She was Black American, mid-30s, dark slacks, cream blouse, not dressed up for him, not dressed down, just professional in a way that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. Her hair was natural, pulled back. Good posture, not rigid. She held a slim folder against her side like she'd forgotten it was there. She was, objectively, striking. He registered that the way he registered most things. Cataloged it, filed it away. What held his attention was something else entirely. She was looking at him with the complete, undramatic calm of someone who was not impressed. That was the thing. Not what she looked like, not what she'd said. The absolute absence of a reaction. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "What boundaries?" he said. She laid them out cleanly. No private residences. No calls after 9 p.m. No gifts. No gag clause NDAs. Listed them with the casual certainty of someone reading items off a grocery list. Not challenging him. Not performing boldness. Just stating facts about how she worked. "You haven't even heard what I'm offering to pay you," he said. Min-jun was transparent about the budget. "It's a fair offer." She met his eyes without adjustment. "Why, these terms don't change based on the number." He stared at her. Most people who sat in that chair, across from him, in his space, on his terms, spent the first 10 minutes making small, constant calibrations, angling themselves toward what he seemed to want, performing competence or warmth or toughness, depending on which way the temperature in the room was moving. She wasn't doing any of that. She was just there, settled, unapologetically taking up exactly the space she occupied. It was against his will. Interesting. He tested her. Reflex. The same way he tested everything, because pressure revealed truth faster than patience ever did. He stood from behind the desk mid-conversation and walked toward her. Unhurried, deliberate, closing the space between them the way he'd learned over years made people recalibrate. Most shifted back slightly, leaned away, started talking faster, or slower, or differently. Something always changed when he moved into someone's space like that. She tracked him with her eyes, adjusted her position in the chair. Not retreating, just a minor geometric correction, the way you'd shift if the light in the room changed, and kept talking. The pattern you're describing with the insomnia isn't purely behavioral. It has a physiological component that compounds when the stimulation cycle is disrupted, which is why cold withdrawal tends to... He was standing close now, closer than professional. He could see the exact line where her collarbone met her blouse. He stayed there and waited. She paused, looked up at him. For 1 second, just one, something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, not attraction. Something more interesting than either. Recognition, like she'd seen this particular move before and had already decided what to do with it. She held his gaze. Then she said evenly, "You can sit back down or stay standing. Either way, I'll keep going." And she did. He felt something in his chest shift. Not desire, or not just that. Something sharper. Something that had to do with being, for once in a very long time, genuinely surprised. He sat back down. The conversation kept moving, and he kept pushing at the edges of it, asking questions that were too personal, going quiet in ways designed to create pressure, letting silences run long to see if she'd fill them anxiously. She redirected the personal questions without stumbling. Let the silences be comfortable. Didn't fill space she hadn't been invited into. 20 minutes in, she said, "Or what? You don't want pleasure." He went still. "You want relief." The room was very quiet. "You've been chasing stimulation," she continued, like she was reading something she'd already worked out, "because your nervous system has indexed it as safety. But it's a closed loop. The stimulation interrupts the noise briefly, then the system resets and the discomfort returns worse than before, and you've been turning the volume up. More, different, better, because that's the only thing that's ever worked even temporarily." She looked at him directly. "You're not broken, but you are exhausted." He'd had doctors, analysts, people who'd studied him, diagnosed him, explained him to himself in clinical language that was accurate and useless. No one had ever said exhausted. No one had ever said it the way she did. Not as a judgment, not as a finding, but as something she could simply see. He felt it, hearing it named. The weight of it, pressing down, suddenly real in a way it hadn't been when it was just his. Then the reflex. He stood up, moved, put physical distance between himself and whatever had just happened. "You're very confident for a first meeting," he said. She looked at him from across the room. "Would you prefer I wasn't?" He didn't answer. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement of something she'd expected. "You can hire me or not," she said simply, "but if you do, what I just said is the thing we'd be working with. Everything else is detail." He asked her at the end, before she stood to leave. One more question, the real one he'd been circling for an hour. "You're not afraid of me?" Not a question. "No," she said. "Why not?" She considered him for a moment, not performing consideration, actually doing it, actually looking at him like she was seeing something and deciding how much to give back. "Because I understand you," she said. "Not I know your type. Not I've handled men like you. Just, I understand you," said with no ego in it, no pride, like it was simply information. He stared at her. She picked up her folder and walked out. He sat in his empty office for a long time after. The city was gray and indifferent outside. He was aware in a way that was uncomfortable and specific of the space the meeting had occupied, the absence of her in it now. The fact that he was still thinking about the exact way she'd looked at him from across the room. He told Min-jun to confirm the engagement. "If you're hooked, like this video, subscribe and drop a comment. This is just the beginning, and you do not want to miss what's coming." 3 weeks, twice weekly sessions. His office always. She never came to the penthouse, per her terms, which he'd expected to chafe against, and instead found himself mapping like a constraint worth studying. She was consistent in a way that nothing else in his life was. She arrived exactly when she said she would, left when the session ended, didn't linger, didn't push past the edges of what they had agreed to. But within the sessions, she pushed plenty. When did you last feel safe enough to be bored? What does the restlessness actually feel like right before it starts? Be specific. You just deflected. Try again. He answered, badly at first, giving her the articulate, controlled version of himself that he gave everyone, the version that was accurate and unrevealing at the same time. She waited those out, then asked again, it differently from a different angle, until something closer to true came out. It was uncomfortable, specifically uncomfortable, the kind of uncomfortable that has a texture to it, that you can feel your way around in the dark. He stopped walking out of meetings, didn't consciously decide to, just noticed at the end of the second week that he hadn't. He slept 4 hours 2 nights in a row, more than he'd managed in months. What he didn't track as carefully, what he only understood later, with a particular clarity of retrospect, was what was happening to him outside the sessions. The way he was suddenly aware, in rooms he'd occupied comfortably for years, of how much space he took up in contrast to how much space she took up and refused to give away. The way he paid attention to things during his day and thought, before he caught himself, I want to tell her that. The way her presence had started to register differently. Less clinical, more present, specific. The way her hands moved when she was making a point. The way she went very still when she was listening hard. The particular quality of her attention when it was on you, like a light that was just warm enough to feel without burning. He filed all of it under professional interest and moved on. He was lying to himself, but he was very good at it, and it would take a little longer for that particular lie to collapse. The collapse, the other kind, happened on a Thursday. Nothing triggered it. That was always the thing about the real breaks. They didn't come from the large moments. They came from ordinary ones. He was in his office late, standard logistics work, on a shipping issue with a Busan subsidiary, just work, just Tuesday, and something shifted without warning. The system kicked in, hard, loud, demanding, stimulation, movement, something, the familiar urgent call that he'd been answering, in some form, for 20 years. And for the first time he didn't answer it. He sat there. Let it be loud. Because of something she'd said, you don't have to answer it. It's allowed to be uncomfortable for a while. He let it be uncomfortable. For 6 minutes. Then his body stopped cooperating. He was on the floor before he understood he was going down. Knees catching him, then one hand on the carpet, then just staying there because standing belonged to a different version of him than the one currently occupying this room. His hands were shaking. His chest was tight in the particular terrifying way that his brain kept calling a heart attack, and his body kept insisting was something else, and neither was helpful right now. He called her. It was 11:40 p.m. She answered on the second ring. Something is happening, he said. Tell me where you are. Office floor. Hurt? No. I'm coming. Stay on the phone. She was there in 22 minutes. He heard her before he saw her. Her voice with security downstairs, calm and clear. Then the elevator. Then the office door. She came in without turning on the overheads. Just the side lamp. Low, warm, a small radius of orange light in the dark room. She crossed to him and crouched down in front of him on the floor without flinching, without any visible alarm. Looked at him. You're not dying, she said. Quiet, direct, not unkind. Our nervous system overload, that's all this is. That's all. Said in the way that made it a container instead of a catastrophe. She walked him through the breathing. In 4 counts, hold, out 6. He followed her voice the way you follow a light in fog. Not because you can see clearly, just because it's the only fixed point. 3 rounds. 5. The shaking slowed. The tightness stopped escalating. He became aware of the room again, the carpet's texture under his palm, rain against the window, the small warm lamp. He became aware of her, how close she was, close enough that he could see the faint line of concentration between her brows, close enough to catch the clean, faint scent of her. Something light, barely there, warm underneath. She was watching his face the way someone watches for color returning, checking specific things, not seeing him the way people usually saw him, seeing through him to whatever was actually there. Then she placed her hands on either side of his face, both palms, steady, warm, not romantic. It wasn't that, or wasn't only that. It was direct, like being pressed back into your own body after being somewhere else for too long. And then everything stopped, not metaphorically. The system went quiet, not suppressed, not fought down, just quiet. The noise that had been running underneath every conscious moment he could remember. The searching, the restless current, the relentless demand for more and different and something. It just stopped. He sat in the silence that followed, and it wasn't empty. That was the thing. The quiet after was usually empty, which was almost worse than the noise. This was just quiet, solid, warm at the edges. He stared at her. She held his gaze. And in that particular, suspended second, close enough to feel her breath, his face in her hands, everything else in the world having temporarily stopped existing, something moved between them that neither of them named, a recognition, the specific nerve-ending awareness of proximity, the understanding, somewhere below language, of exactly how close this was to something else entirely. She took her hands away. The moment ended, but it didn't disappear. "What did you do?" he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Bilateral grounding," she said. "Standard somatic technique." "That's not what I mean." She looked at him. "Your body isn't broken, Jae-hyun." First time she'd used his name. "It's just never been safe before." He didn't sleep that night, but differently than usual. To not the restless churning of the system running hard. Just awake. Still. Sitting at the window with his hands in his lap, thinking about nothing specific, feeling the absence of noise in his own head, like a new room he hadn't known existed. The memory of her hands on his face, the quiet, her eyes holding his at that exact distance. He sat with all of it, and for the first time in 34 years, the not sleeping felt like rest. The changes started small. The office first, he had it reconfigured slightly. Better lamp on her side, warmer bulb. Second chair, better angle. Small table at the right height. He told himself it was practical. A good work environment. Reasonable adjustments. She came in the following Tuesday, looked around once and said nothing. He caught himself watching her notice it, waiting to see something in her face. Satisfaction, appreciation, acknowledgement. She gave him none, just sat down and started where they'd left off. He found that more interesting than appreciation would have been, which should have been a signal. The guard was the second thing. He'd had a secondary detail positioned near her building. Not obvious, just present. Risk management, standard procedure for people with professional access to him. She found out when her neighbor flagged the black car outside. She called him directly. Didn't go through Min-jun. "Tell me why there's someone outside my building who works for you. It's precautionary. Remove him." "Amara." "Today, Jae-hyun." He had the guard pulled within the hour. Told himself he'd be more discreet next time. Hadn't yet identified that next time was the problem, not the visibility and the scheduling. Quietly through Min-jun, he'd started shaping the calendar around her. A canceled request here, a conflict manufactured there. Not aggressive, just engineering space so that she was more available when he needed to reach her. So nothing competed with their sessions. So she was accessible. He called it efficiency. He was lying to himself again, getting less good at it. 3 weeks after the collapse, she sat down, set her folder on the arm of the chair, looked at him and said, "We need to talk about what's been happening outside these sessions." The air in the room changed. "In what sense?" he said, keeping his voice level. "The office, the guard, the schedule management." She listed them without heat. "I want to understand what you think you're doing. Managing logistics. These aren't your logistics. I'm protecting a professional asset." She looked at him for a moment. "Say that again," she said quietly. He didn't, because he'd heard it the second time. Asset. Sitting in this room where she came twice a week and asked him the most honest questions anyone had ever asked him and stayed through the answers without flinching. And he just called her an asset. Out loud. To her face. "You're building a cage," she said. "And you're building it around the only thing that's been helping you." She leaned forward slightly. Her voice stayed even, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger. Something steadier than anger. Conviction. "If you cage me, Jae-hyun, you lose the only thing helping you. Not because I quit, though I will, but because the moment I become something you control, I stop being what I actually am." "Which is what?" he said. "Someone you can't predict." A pause. "You cannot have peace and control it at the same time. Those two things cannot coexist." The room was quiet. "I'm not trying to control you," he said. "I know you believe that," she said. "That's exactly why we're talking about it." He pulled back. He genuinely did stop the scheduling interference, stood down the guard permanently, stopped adjusting her environment. Thought he'd solved it. What he hadn't solved was the fear underneath the actions, the belief that had been running in him since long before he understood it, that the only way to keep something good was to make sure it couldn't leave. That belief was sitting there waiting, and someone was about to weaponize it. Min-jun came in person. That was the first signal. Min-jun handled everything through secure channels. Walking in and closing the door and standing with his hands folded was a specific body language that meant this is above the usual threshold. "What?" Jae-hyun said. Min-jun set a document on the desk. Jae-hyun looked at it. Financial intelligence report. The kind that corporate investigators built when they had access to the right systems and enough time. Amara Vance's name at the top. Min-jun walked him through it. Financial trails. Layered, obfuscated, but traceable when you knew what you were looking for. Account connections to two companies. One shell, one legitimate, and the legitimate one happened to be in direct competition with a Rook subsidiary that had been underperforming for 2 quarters. A documented contact, alleged, is cross-referenced, with a name Jae-hyun recognized immediately. Hwan, a name he knew like he knew the weather. Always present, always potentially dangerous, managed over years through careful positioning and preemptive pressure. Hwan had been trying to find the opening for 3 years, had failed every time, had recently gone quiet, which Jae-hyun had logged as either retreat or reorganization. The report suggested reorganization, a timeline. Her engagement with him mapped against a series of moves in the competitor landscape. The pattern as laid out, she hadn't been a referral, she'd been a placement. He read it twice. Source, he said, independent investigator, cross-referenced internally. Confidence level. Min-jun paused. That pause. He'd learned Min-jun's pauses, what they carried. The financial data is solid, Min-jun said. The interpretive layer is the strongest read of the data. It's not the only read, but it's the strongest. Yes. The room was very quiet. Jae-hyun set the report down. He thought about the floor of his office, her hands on his face. Your body isn't broken. It's just never been safe. He thought about 6 weeks of being asked the most honest questions he'd ever been asked, and finding, to his surprise, that he had honest answers. He thought about how thoroughly, how completely he'd let his guard down. And then the old thing, the thing that had been running underneath everything his whole life, older than the system, older than the restlessness, the thing Dr. Weiss in Geneva had pointed at with one word he hadn't been ready for. Fear, the specific fear. Sana, the one that lived below every other fear. I'm being managed, I'm being controlled. I am the subject of something I don't control. It rose up and swallowed the picture whole. Cancel her building access, he said. Today. Jae-hyun, and I want a full review of everything she had access to. Every document, every session note, I'd recommend we verify before. I'm not asking for a recommendation. She arrived at 2 p.m., was stopped at the front desk. He watched on the security feed. She stood at the desk while the receptionist delivered the message. Her face changed. Something moving through it, brief that he couldn't read from the camera at this distance. Then she stilled, nodded once, looked up at the security camera in the lobby. She knew where they were. She just looked directly at it for 1 second. And then she turned and walked out through the glass doors into the street and didn't look back. He called her before she reached the corner. She answered. He gave her the outline. Not everything. Enough. The accounts, the company names, the timeline, Juan's name. She was quiet through all of it. Then, those aren't my accounts. The trail, I don't have accounts connected to those companies. Her voice was still level, the same level it always was. He found that, in this moment for the first time, slightly maddening. He wanted her to be shaken, wanted something to crack, wanted confirmation in either direction. And I have no contact with Juan or anyone in his network. Amara, who compiled this report? She said. That's not who compiled it, Jae-hyun. An independent investigator. A pause. An independent investigator, she repeated. Quiet. The way someone repeats a thing that has a different shape when said aloud. And Juan's name is in it. Yes. And the report came through someone inside your organization. I'm not asking you to confirm. I'm telling you something. Her voice changed. Not louder, not harder, but something shifted in the frequency of it. Something that might, in someone less composed, have been fear. Documents can be fabricated, you know that. You work in environments where it happens regularly. The question you should be asking isn't whether the accounts exist. It's who built them and why. Or, he said, you're telling me what someone would tell me if they'd been caught. Silence, long, terrible silence. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, to quiet in a way that had nothing to do with calm. I see, she said. I see, not, how could you? Not, I'm going to prove this. Not any of the things someone says when they're caught or when they're falsely accused and angry about it. Just, I see. I think, she said, that you've already made your decision, and I'm not going to argue you into a different one. A pause. I hope it gives you what you think you need. He almost ended the call there. Then very quietly, so quiet he had to press the phone harder against his ear to catch it. I'm sorry this happened to you. Not, I'm sorry you did this. Not, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. I'm sorry this happened to you. Like she was looking at him, even now through a phone call, from a street somewhere, and seeing something he couldn't see himself. The line went quiet. Then she was gone. This is the part of the story that lives in your chest. Drop a comment, tell me what you're feeling right now, and subscribe if you haven't. You need to see how this ends. He sat at his desk for a long time, waited for the thing that was supposed to come. Relief, control restored, threat neutralized, the system settling. It didn't come. What came instead was the silence. The old silence. The one from before. Not the quiet from the floor of his office with her hands on his face. Not that. The empty kind. The kind he'd spent 34 years trying to outrun. The first week was bad in specific, identifiable ways. He walked out of a meeting. First time in over a month. He'd counted in some part of himself the days since it last happened. And now the streak was broken and the number reset to 0. He slept 90 minutes in a 30-hour stretch. The edge came back under his skin like weather returning, familiar as a scar. Worse somehow for the contrast. He hadn't understood until now how much the system had quieted. Didn't understand how loud it actually was until he'd heard the difference. He told himself he was fine. He was very good at that. The lie held for 11 days. On the 12th day, the empire started making sounds. The subsidiary in Busan, the same one in the fabricated report, hit a compounding operational issue. The kind that required someone at the top thinking clearly and sleeping and capable of the sustained focus that had built this organization in the first place. He couldn't do it. Min-jun managed. The senior team held meetings Jae-hyun didn't attend. Decisions got made without him, which had never happened before, and the fact that no one said anything about it told him exactly how visible the deterioration had become. His opponents moved. Juan moved. Not aggressively. Juan never moved aggressively. That was the thing about him. He was patient in the way that water was patient, just finding the cracks. Small repositioning, realigned partnerships, Coordinated pressure in 3 separate areas simultaneously. And the kind of campaign that required advanced preparation. The kind of preparation that would have started before the report arrived on Jae-hyun's desk. He tracked it, couldn't fully respond to it, because before her, the system had been constant background noise, and he'd built his entire operating style inside it. Learned to function with the volume up, the way you learn to sleep with traffic outside your window. He'd had years of practice functioning inside the noise. 6 weeks of quiet had ruined that. Now the noise was the same volume, but he'd lost his tolerance for it. His baseline had updated. His body remembered what it was like to not be in constant static and refused to cooperate with the pretense that this was acceptable. Before her, hunger. After her, loss. Loss is worse. That's what nobody tells you. You can spend your whole life in a particular pain and be functional inside it, and then something better interrupts, even briefly, and now you know what you're missing. Now the pain has a shape, has a name, has a face. He sat on the floor of his office on a Wednesday night, not collapsed this time, just sitting, by choice, in the dark, and turned the memory of the phone call over in his hands, the way you turn over something that cut you, looking for the edge. I hope it gives you what you think you need. She hadn't been angry. He kept landing on that. She hadn't been defensive or frantic or cold. She'd been sad, quietly, composedly sad, like a person watching something avoidable happen and being unable to stop it. I'm sorry this happened to you. To you. He picked up his phone. He called someone outside his usual team, someone who owed him a favor and had the right access and no stake in the answer. I need a full chain of custody review on a financial intelligence document, he said. Priority, everything. Not just the accounts, the signatories, the building trail, who commissioned the investigation. The callback came 18 hours later. Min-jun brought it in person. 1 page. Clean language. The accounts were real. The transfers had occurred. The connection to the competitor companies was there in the data. But the signatory chain, traced correctly, dead-ended at a nominee company registered in a jurisdiction Hwan used with regularity. The accounts had been opened via a proxy structure designed to route appearance of ownership toward a target, toward her, while the actual beneficial ownership pointed somewhere else. Someone had built this, had taken time, had spent money, had specifically engineered a document that would land on Jae-hyun's desk and activate the exact fear that was most likely to make him act rashly and irreversibly. Someone who knew about the engagement, someone inside his organization, someone who understood, had done the work to understand that the rawest, most reliable nerve in Jae-hyun Rook was not his business interests or his reputation or his empire. It was his terror of being controlled, and they'd pressed it with surgical accuracy, and it had worked perfectly. He sat with that. The humiliation of it was specific, precise, and not the humiliation of being outsmarted. He could survive that, had survived versions of it before. This was the humiliation of having been read, of having had his most private wound cataloged and used, of having, in response, taken the bait so completely that he destroyed the one thing in his life that had been genuinely helping him. He hadn't just lost a professional engagement. He'd proven to himself and to his enemies that he was exactly as predictable as they'd calculated. The report was fabricated, he said. Yes, Min-jun said. Find the analyst inside this building who had access to Vance's engagement detail, he said. Full investigation. Nobody leaves the process early. He stood up. And find me her address. Min-jun looked at him. It's on file. I know, he said. I want you to look it up deliberately. So this is a conscious act. Min-jun understood. Didn't say so. Just nodded. Jae-hyun put on his jacket. No guards. He had the driver drop him 3 blocks from her building and walk the rest in the rain. Because this wasn't organizational, wasn't strategic, wasn't Rook Group anything. This was just a man who'd done something wrong, who needed to say so to the person he'd done it to. The rain was cold. He didn't have an umbrella. He noticed both of these things and kept walking. Her building was modest, clean, well-maintained, ordinary. The kind of building where normal people lived normal lives and nobody had a security monitor in the lobby they could watch from 40 floors up. He stood in the hallway outside her door on the 4th floor and looked at it. He'd faced down hostile government officials. He'd sat across tables from people who wanted him bankrupt or worse. He'd walked into rooms where the entire architecture of the meeting was designed to break him. He'd never felt anything quite like standing alone in a hallway that smelled like someone's cooking from 2 floors up, about to knock on a door he'd had no right to close. He knocked. Nothing. Then movement inside, then her voice, careful, not alarmed, the professional caution of someone who'd learned to be measured about unexpected things. "Who is it?" "Jae-hyun." Longer silence than he expected. Long enough to hold the very concrete possibility that she simply wouldn't open it, that she'd decide, reasonably defensively, that she was done, that she'd say something brief through the door, and he'd walk back down the hallway with nothing. The lock turned. She opened the door. Casual clothes, a loose top, dark pants, hair down, the most civilian he'd ever seen her. It made her look more like herself somehow, less like a professional construct and more like an actual person who lived somewhere and made dinner, and had a neighbor who'd noticed the black car outside. She looked at him, then at his jacket, soaked through. "You're wet," she said. "Yes," he said. She stepped back from the door. No tea, no performance of hospitality. She sat in the armchair. He sat on the edge of the sofa. She looked at him across the small living room and waited. He told her everything. The full independent review, the nominee company and the jurisdiction, Juan's structural fingerprints on the trail, the internal leak he was still investigating. In the timeline that made clear this had been built before the report landed on his desk, that it had been designed specifically for him. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, the apartment was quiet. "They knew about us," she said. "Yes. They knew enough to know what would work on you." He didn't look away from that. "Yes. And it did." "Yes," he said, simply. "It did." She looked at him for a moment, the specific, searching look he'd come to recognize as her actually seeing something rather than cataloging surface. "You didn't come here to explain," she said. "You came here to say you were wrong." "I was wrong," he said, "completely. I acted from the exact fear we'd been working on. I used it against you. And I'm not here asking you to fix that. I'm just here because you deserve to hear the truth from me directly." She was quiet. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. Clear, not cruel, just accurate. "What happened wasn't small. You pulled my access. You implied I'd manipulated you. You gave me a phone call instead of the chance to respond like a person who deserved to defend herself. I know. And then you let me walk out of that building in front of your staff and your cameras." "I know," he said again. "I know all of it." The room held the weight of that for a moment. Then she said, "But I don't think you're lying right now, and I don't think you came here for strategy." "I didn't." She looked at him, at the wet jacket, at his face. "What do you want?" she said. "Not from me, just in general." He thought about it, actually thought about it. "I want to stop being afraid of the quiet," he said. "I want to be able to sit in a room by myself and have the room just be a room." He paused. "And I want to not have done what I did to you, but that one is already done." She nodded slowly. "Those are honest answers," she said. "They're the only kind I have left," he said. She didn't say yes, not that night. What she said before he left. "If there's a path back, and I'm not committing to that tonight, it would look different, completely different terms. I coordinate with a therapist of your choosing. You have no administrative involvement in anything connected to me. And the moment I see controlling behavior, any of it, it ends. No discussion." "Understood." "You'd need to be in real therapy with someone else, not as a formality." "Yes. And I need time," she said. "I won't be rushed." He nodded, left, didn't call for 6 days. On the 7th, he sent one message through Minjun. "Engage Dr. Seo starting Monday. Twice weekly. Available on Vance's timeline when she's ready." He put his phone down and left it alone. If this story is doing something to you, tell me in the comments, like the video. Subscribe. The ending is the reason this story exists. He went to therapy, not as performance, as the actual, slow, unglamorous process of sitting with someone skilled and being asked to look at things he'd spent 34 years outrunning. Dr. Seo was structured where Amara was intuitive. Cognitive frameworks, EMDR, careful timelines, different work, harder in different ways. She asked him about his grandfather's dining table and a specific year at 14 that he'd filed under irrelevant and turned out to be load-bearing in ways that took 3 sessions to fully surface. He went twice a week. He didn't walk out. The system didn't disappear, but he started having days, real days, not just sessions, where it was background rather than foreground, where the quiet in a room was just quiet. He recovered the ground Juan had taken, slowly, methodically, and without the urgency of someone operating from fear. The internal leak was identified. A mid-level analyst who'd been in Juan's pocket for 18 months, who had no idea how comprehensively the exit from the organization was about to be managed. He functioned, better than he expected. He thought about her more than was probably clinically advisable, which Dr. Seo noted with the specific neutral interest of someone who found the information useful. 10 weeks passed. Then the call came on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had his driver pull over and she said, "I've thought about it." 6 months later, not everything was different. The insomnia came back sometimes. The system ran on certain nights. The restlessness lived in him, quieter now, smaller, but present. He'd stopped expecting it to disappear completely. That had been the wrong goal. The goal had been to stop letting it run the whole operation. He sat in his office on a Saturday afternoon in late autumn and worked. Not urgently, maintenance work. The city was doing its thing outside, indifferent, alive, moving without him. And the building was mostly empty and the room was quiet. He was fine, not managing fine, not performing fine, just fine. Sitting in a quiet room on a quiet afternoon, and the room was just a room. He noticed it after 20 minutes. The noticing made him set down his pen. He sat there and let himself feel it. This ordinary nothing. Was this unremarkable Saturday, the city outside and the lamp on, and the work on the desk, and the silence in his head that had no edge to it. This is enough. The thought arrived on its own. Unasked for, uncomplicated. This is enough. He sat with it for a long time. The last formal session ended on a quiet note, the way the important ones always do. Not dramatically, no orchestrated resolution, just a conversation that reached its natural end. She asked, "What do you think you were actually looking for? All those years?" He'd thought about this. He'd had time. "I thought I needed satisfaction," he said. "I spent years chasing the thing that would finally feel like enough. The next thing. The better thing. The thing that would make the system stop." He paused. But that was never the real thing. The real thing was, he stopped, found it. And I needed to be seen, not desired, not needed, just seen, accurately, without the performance. She looked at him. "Did you get that?" He thought about it honestly. "Starting to," he said. She nodded. And in her expression, not pride, not satisfaction, something quieter than both. He saw the thing he'd been looking for since before he understood he was looking. Someone seeing him clearly and not looking away. He walked out of the building into cold autumn air, hands in his pockets, no guards, no car waiting, just a man on a street in Neo-Seoul with somewhere to be. The city moved around him. The silence moved with him. And for the first time in his life, for the first time he could consciously remember, the silence didn't feel like something to outrun. It just felt like where he lived now. For years, he'd been the man who couldn't be satisfied. What he couldn't see was that he'd been asking the wrong question his whole life. Not what more can I have, but what do I actually need? He'd needed someone who wouldn't perform for him, who wouldn't run from him, who would look at him, clearly, steadily, without flinching, and refuse to pretend he was simpler than he was. That was the thing no amount of money or power or pursuit had ever given him. And when it came quietly, the way real things always do. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what hit hardest. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Like the video. It helps more people find it. I'll see you in the next one.